All right, we got why nerd culture died.
From Screech to Maurice Moss to Tony Stark, the nerd subculture has undergone a metamorphosis. It somehow
hmm
went from the bullied outcast of society into a satanic scare, all the way into the main hero of many blockbuster films.
Bro, that is really true actually. When I grew up as a little kid and I first saw like nerds on TV, they were like all the stereotypical things that like you just showed. But I think I would probably have classified myself as a nerd in high school, but in my head, nerds were kind of smart, but I was only like okay. I was like a C/B student in school. I was just like okay at some things or whatever, but man, it's different nowadays. Everybody's trying to be just really smart, and there's a whole like culture along with that word nerd, and I'm sure you'll get into it. So let's just keep going.
Your work on anti-electron collisions is unparalleled.
However, unintentionally, nerd culture would effectively destroy itself by becoming the one thing that it swore never to be: popular.
You already did?
Yeah.
Oh shit, dude.
Screen iPod with touch controls.
Yep. Bro. Where'd it go? Where'd it go?
Swore never to be popular.
You already did? Oh shit, dude.
Screen iPod with touch controls.
Bro, honestly, I think Ninja pierced, like when Ninja popped off and he was able to pierce through that what do you call it? That invisible ceiling of gamer culture into mainstream culture. I think he was a really great like spokesperson for gamers because I mean if you go back and look at like a lot of the things that he was talking about like on all these shows when he was on there, he's like, yeah, when I was in school, I went to school, I got good grades, and I did all my homework. I did maybe an extracurricular here and there, and he said he was a good kid, and he did everything that he was supposed to be doing. But whenever it was time to game, he just gamed or whatever. So it wasn't Ninja was such a deviation from the traditional like neck beard, overweight, still lives in his mom's basement type of like gamer slash nerd. It was such a deviation. Like look at him, he's just like towering over Ellen or whatever. And I mean, yeah, he's just such a deviation. And I mean, I get it with like the blue hair was probably like a little off-putting or whatever, but it's whatever. He was, for the most part, he was like a good spokesperson for like gamers as a conglomeration, I'd say.
So when it comes to the term nerd, the origins of it come from Dr. Seuss, from a book that he wrote called If I Run a Zoo, written in the 50s.
Really?
By the early 60s, the term had
Bro, I've read so many Dr. Seuss books. I don't even remember reading this one.
spread. It was being used to describe a certain type of very bookish, socially inept person.
Goddamn nerds.
Yeah, they're book smart, not really street smart. They wear glasses. There's tape in the center because they probably broke in, but they're too poor to like get a new pair of glasses, so they just tape them right there. They got like a short sleeve button down shirt with a little pocket protector right there with all their pens, and they're ready to write something down. Their voice is high and kind of nasally, and they wear their pants up and their shirts tucked in, and they have a belt, and they got the high high calf socks, and they got the little nice dress shoes and whatnot, and they got their backpacks full of like 20-30 pounds of books and so on and so forth.
But it would really be in the 70s with the show
Yeah.
Happy Days, where the term nerd would end up in mainstream vernacular. There wasn't just this sudden boom of socially awkward and hyper-intelligent
And the opposite of the nerd was the Fonz. This guy, leather jacket, denim, blue like denim jeans, a white shirt underneath, rides a motorcycle, hits a piece of equipment, all of a sudden it's repaired, he's just the cool guy.
Kids because of fluoride in the tap water. These types of people have, of course, existed all throughout history. They existed under many different names, but what's most interesting is that their social standing and status really varied under the context of the culture that they were in.
Oh,
In the
we better get social status in here.
1500s in England, there was the term bookworm. Bookworms were people who dedicated and devoted lots of their time to reading and studying. This makes
Yes, the nerds of the old age. It's really funny to think about because if somebody was a book nerd, you had no idea if they were a book nerd. You would just randomly see them out in the village or your town. It's like, oh, hey, what's up, man? Haven't seen you out here in a while. You look pretty pale. And they're just like, yeah, I've been reading and writing books, and they got their little candle, and they're just like, I'm going to the library and I'll be back. And they're just doing their thing.
sense because this happened in the Enlightenment period. Reading and studying were now common activities. Every little Billy boy was getting a book for Christmas instead of just a ball of yarn. And so there was a rise in big brain, high IQ quickscopers.
Nice.
But even further back, ancient China had Junzi, India had Brahmin, and of course you had the Greek philosophers and scholars. The social standing and society's view of these people was starkly different to that of the bullied nerd in the 70s.
Yeah.
Often these people were heralded as wealthy, smart, successful. Your very typical image of the weak, weedy looking dork was the complete opposite of the strong, wealthy, stoic of Marcus Aurelius. But it would be in the 70s where this reverence towards people that maybe could be defined as nerdy completely changed into the opposite.
Do I look like Mother Teresa? If I did, I probably wouldn't mind talking to the Geek Squad.
Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to Bespoke Post for sponsoring. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club and they deliver you a box of awesome. It's free to join and you can skip a month or cancel at any time. What's cool is that 90% of the products are from small brands, many of which that are based in the US.
That's not a cup.
Every month they introduce their members to new cool products. That can be stuff like outdoor gear, home and kitchen goods, clothing.
Bro, you led it with the knife. It's like, this is Bespoke Post and it's just like, knife.
And more based on a preference quiz that you'll take. Every single box of awesome has about $70 worth of goods, but only costs you a fraction of the value. Before your box is even shipped, you'll be able to preview what it is you're going to receive. So then you can decide whether you want to keep that box or maybe swap it for a different box. Or if you don't like it at all, you can just skip that month and wait for the next. You only ever pay for what you want. One of the products I really like is the Weekender. It's this really nice looking bag. It just kind of has that sort of nature, outdoorsy look to it. The next one I really like is this knife called Forge. Proper timeless looking knife. It just looks perfect. To get 20% off your first box of awesome, click the link in the description and enter the code JimmyTheGiant20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/JimmyTheGiant20. Anyway, back to the video.
All right.
In media and film, you'd see portrayals of nerdy archetypes.
Bro, I remember watching all these movies when I was a little kid. I only saw them like once, so it's like kind of fuzzy, but I 100% remember like all these movies. But at the time, I didn't really think anything of it because I was just under the assumption that that was the norm. Like, that's that type of person.
It was around this same sort of time in the 70s where you were having a rise in things like science fiction, fantasy books, comic books, tabletop board games, collector culture, as well as the emergence of hacking, coding with computers. And so there was becoming a number of interests and hobbies that would become the backbone of nerd
D&D.
culture.
Bro, D&D did not help the nerd culture. If anything, it only deepened it. To instead of just like reading books and being okay with like computers and shit, it's like, oh, now they play D&D.
Costume is the uniform that I've designed from the film project that I'm working on.
Star Trek, yep.
Noted that this is only a prototypical version.
What is it about these interests, particularly in that era, that caused people to look down on the nerd? Well, I think it has a lot to do with what society and culture was like in the 60s to the 80s, what success meant and what industries were leading at the time. This was like the golden age of marketing and advertisement. You were seeing industries such as real estate, automotive, insurance, entertainment, media. All of these industries tended to have a very particular type of person that would be successful in them.
Yeah. Everybody was a caricature of a certain type of person that you would just see in life. You had, I mean, let's just go back to high school for a sec. PTSD. What do you got? You got the jock. You got, what else? You got the nerd. You got the popular crew. You got, what else? You got the music bros. You got maybe the gamer bros. And maybe there'd be like a little bit of overlap. There would be the bros that brought Pokemon cards and Yu-Gi-Oh cards to school. That'd be me. What else? There'd be like your music people that like just really liked music for some reason, and they would have their like little CD players. That was also me. And anytime they'd like walk around, they would just have their little headphones on, even though it's only gonna be on for 5 minutes or whatever. And then you had your library people that just hung out in the library and did stuff. Yeah, there was a bunch of different types of stereotypes back in the day.
Coming. Hey.
He said the thing.
Smooth Mickey with his greaseback hair, his nice colourful suit, and his used car dealership, he would have been the top of his social hierarchy. The ladies wanted him and the men wanted to be him. So, of course, society elevated and championed the archetype of the jock, and in turn bullied the archetype of the nerd. I mean, there's probably like a biological reason to doing this. Nerdy hobbies and activities and interests at the time were very much not rewarded in the marketplace. To get by, be
Well, no, they weren't rewarded. They weren't rewarded because people couldn't make money off of doing the thing like we can today. You can make money off of doing essentially any different type of hobby, as long as you just record it, and then throw it up on YouTube. All right, and as long as people like it, there's a market for it.
Successful and survive, you needed the more charismatic, confident type of personality, and twiddling around with a computer and playing Dungeons and Dragons wasn't the thing that was going to make you wealthy. And I think this can be really epitomized by the satanic panic.
You have eyewitnesses. For instance, one case,
Satanic panic, that was a thing.
the parents were actually saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself.
What? There's no shot that this was actually on the news, dude. No way. Like, what?
There was a push to try and ban these games. They were taken out of shops, schools, etc. for fear that little Timmy...
Bro, I remember when my buddy's mom didn't allow him to watch Harry Potter in theaters because she thought it was satanic. And wizardry and witchcraft was of the devil. All right? And that was about 15-ish plus maybe 20 years ago. Yeah, those people still exist. 100%, dude. And same thing with Pokemon. I mean, you have to think about it. Like, when Pokemon first came out, I think everybody got that one notice at school where it was on a piece of paper, and I think on mine it said something, we regret to, or we acknowledge that this hobby of obtaining Pokemon cards, because my little notice said Pokemon cards, is taking off and is very popular in America, and it has been, it has come over from, I think it was China or Japan or whatever. I think it was China. It's a very popular game in China, and it's got popular in America. We acknowledge this, but we will no longer further allow Pokemon cards on the school campus. We are not responsible if these cards are stolen or destroyed in any way, shape, or form. Therefore, you are not allowed to have them. And if they're seen on campus, they will be confiscated, and so on and so forth. That was along the lines of the notice that I got. Because, I mean, people were stealing Pokemon cards. Certain parents were like, "Oh, they're pocket monsters. They're monsters. It's satanic devil stuff. You can't have that." It's like, bro, it's a card.
He would play D&D one day and then slit a goat's head off the next.
I have spells. I'm going to fly. You don't have enough points. I am the maze controller.
What? Bro, that was Tom Hanks. Oh my god, that's so funny.
Elvis Presley to John Travolta and Tom Cruise, these were the idolized types of personalities in that era.
Yeah.
A character like Don Draper would be the epitome of a successful man in the 70s and 80s.
But everybody else's tobacco is toasted.
No, everybody else's tobacco is poisonous. Lucky Strikes is toasted.
However, under the surface, a revolution was happening that would completely flip the world on its head, and that was the invention of the personal computer.
Yep. So I wasn't there when the PCs first came out. I remember, when did I first see? I think I remember first seeing a PC when I was in middle school, maybe. And I lived in like a tight-knit community. And some like the bus would go like on the back side of the community and then go off to the front first. And sometimes, this was back in the day when the bus driver like kind of knew where everyone lived, but not really. So if you were to just get off at somebody else's stop, they would just be like, okay. So I got off the stop at my buddy's house sometimes, and his dad owned a computer. And what was it? What was the game he played? I think one of the first games I remember seeing on a computer. No. Shit, before that. I went to my aunt's house one time, and I remember playing Leisure Suit Larry and the pinball game that you could just play. But I was a little kid. I didn't know how to fucking progress the game of Leisure Suit Larry. I know it was like an adult game, and I didn't. It was only years later that I realized it was like supposed to have like sex in it and whatnot. But as a little kid, I was like, how do I play this? I'm just sitting there spamming buttons, trying to move and hit enter and talk to people. And how do I progress and all this shit? And I didn't get it. So I was like, whatever. I'm just going to sit here and play pinball and asteroids on the computer. Those were my first experiences with computer games.
In the 70s, there were a few PCs that came along, but the one that really took center stage was the Apple II. That was released in 1977 and had become highly successful in the mass mainstream market. And the genius behind this creation was one man in particular, Steve Jobs. As well as a whole team of other people, but it sounds cooler when I say it like that.
Yeah.
That's maybe the most important thing.
Bro, Steve Jobs right here, he looks like a grizzled fucking lumberjack. All he needs is the plaid shirt, and he is bing chilling.
Is to shake off this erroneous notion that life is there and you're just going to live in it.
I remember that computer. The whole computer was in that big ass thing, and in the computer lab at my school, that's what we had.
Embrace it, change it, improve it, make your mark upon it.
Steve Jobs was very unique. He was this very nerdy, but also very charismatic person, despite being into computers.
Oh, see what happens when you give the nerd a little charisma.
Coding, etc. He had this charm and likableness to it. The way he would speak wasn't that of like the kind of dorky nerd. Instead, he had kind of a more hippie, creative, inspirational way of speaking. The iconic Apple adverts, as well as his very unique way of launching products.
Hello, I am Macintosh.
Meant that he had completely challenged the typical notion of what a nerd was. And throughout his career, he became a very unorthodox cultural icon. But you see, all of the characteristics I've mentioned about Steve Jobs, his charisma, his charm. Alright, Jimmy, we get it, you like Steve Jobs. It was clear
That's
that
okay.
Steve Jobs kind of had 1 foot in and 1 foot out of nerdom.
Are you a hippie or a nerd?
Oh, if I had to pick one of those two, I'm clearly a hippie. They work with computers because they are the medium that is best capable of transmitting some feeling that you have, that you want to share with other people.
But there would be one other person who would come along and make a cultural impact and was unashamedly your classic nerd. And that was Bill Gates.
Oh, yeah. I would say this is the pie scene. Bill Gates was 100% more nerdy than Steve Jobs.
So the microprocessor, the chip that drives it, improving so rapidly that any access to information or processing of information would move into
Oh.
the PC, and it would be the tool.
Oh, yep. That's it right there. There it is, dude.
Of the information.
Your boy Billy, now that's a nerd.
Yeah.
From his look to his very factual, intellectual way of speaking, he embodied the classic image that everyone had of what a nerd was. But yet, mainstream culture seemed to embrace him, being heralded in 1995 in Times magazine as the master of the universe. And so, as Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were rising in cultural significance, more and more film and TV depictions of nerds would come along. However, the stereotype really didn't change much. From Milhouse in The Simpsons,
Yep.
Steve Urkel in Family Matters.
Oh my God, Steve Urkel! I forgot about this show, dude. Oh my God. This was so good. I love Family Matters, dude. And then when he turned into Stefan, like the Fonz version, like the cool guy, I thought that was like the coolest thing.
And Screech Powers in Saved by the
Yep.
Bell. These were all dorky nerds who were constantly the butt of every single joke. But then, in steps the 2000s.
What is iPod?
Panasonic DVD player, digital palm recorder.
Ready for a more useful internet? Welcome to MSN Broadband.
Technology was rapidly advancing every single year. Owning a personal computer had gone from this thing that very few people had to now pretty commonplace in most people's homes. And so with this, the accessibility into nerdy activities and communities was becoming far and far more easy, as well as far more discreet and private. You know, instead of having to flash a virginity card to get into Comic-Con where you're dressed up as a level 20 warlock, you could now very quietly and discreetly talk in online forums far and far away from polite society, as you would geek out with like-minded individuals over your love for Star Trek. And so the computer really became a Trojan horse for the world of nerds. And this brings us on to the next pillar of nerd radicalization, and that was the inception of MMORPGs.
Oh, of course you gotta. It's so funny that you have to bring up the genre of MMOs into this. It's so funny. RuneScape.
In my opinion, there was one game that really opened up the floodgates into the world of nerds, and that game was RuneScape.
Bro, I remember. So the game title didn't always look like this. Before it was like one word. All right. Because when I first saw this game, I thought it was called Run Escape. All right. There wasn't this like rocks on the top, rocks on the bottom, divided by a sword. All right. I literally thought it was Run Escape. And I looked at it. And by the time I saw like RuneScape, I think I had what do you call it? I think I had like an N64 or some shit. Or like a Sega. And I thought the graphics of the consoles were so much better than this game that I didn't even like bother. Like I looked at it and I was like, why does it look like doo-doo? I just went back and I went back home to play my N64.
You all probably know about RuneScape, a massive fantasy world where you roleplay as some kind of character, leveling up your skills, etc. But there's a reason I say RuneScape as opposed to the more elaborate MMORPGs like World of Warcraft. And that's because RuneScape was a free game. And not only that, but it could operate on your browser.
Man, playing RuneScape there?
On pretty much any quality of computer. And so, you didn't need to know how to download, or whatever the hell that meant, and you didn't need an incredibly expensive high-end computer.
No, you didn't.
It was a very important stepping stone for taking the world of nerd culture and open it up to a more mainstream world. For me, my evolution into nerdy culture was effectively my parents bought a computer, to do work and whatnot. Someone in school told me about the game Neopets, so I played that, but it just wasn't hitting the spot, so then
I remember Neopets. And do you remember that, like, it was like an ant game? It was like an educational game, like a disc or something. And I think you were ants, and there'd be these like math problems and like shapes puzzles that you would have to go do. And once you completed the games or whatever, you could just get on out of there.
I moved on to RuneScape. RuneScape was then my gateway drug into the Source Engine games of Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, and Gary's Mod, where there was far more elaborate.
See, I wasn't there for the Source Engine games like Counter-Strike because I don't know, my parents were just not technologically like advanced or savvy in any way, but they knew whenever I went to my friend's house that I would play like on a console, and then when I came home, I would be like, "Hey, this guy's got a console. I want one too. I want an N64 too." So eventually, my birthday came swinging around, and then all of a sudden, boom, I got an N64.
Communities around these games. There was like well-known players, clans, servers, and jokes.
What are you doing in my swamp?
These very niche jokes that typically existed in video games would go on to lay the foundations for meme culture. And so in the 2000s, meme culture was massively spreading. You'd have things like Trollface and of course Forever Alone, which I think really embody the typical mentality of a nerd. Trolling being the enjoyment of making people look stupid, and then Forever Alone being the acceptance that we're never going to get laid. Websites like 4chan, Reddit, Newgrounds would really help proliferate meme culture. But into the late 2000s, things were changing very suddenly. These previously more isolated communities that were siloed away in different parts of the internet, like whilst I was double door banging someone down mid on Dust 2, someone else might be
playing the dating sim on Newgrounds, trying to see the naked girl scene at the end of the dating sim.
I think I'm going to use ChatGPT to get a reference here. Pop bloodlust and burst down Onyxia before she takes flight into phase 2. Maybe that means something to you. This would change where things like Reddit and Tumblr and then more mainstream social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube would become more and more popular in the early 2010s. These platforms were far more centralized. If you're on Reddit, you might have a bunch of different niche subcultures that were starting to experience some more connectiveness. So as the visibility of these fandoms grew, the mainstreamification of nerd culture was truly underway.
Those aren't your
It was getting
tourists.
bigger.
Those are zombies, ninjas, and villains. But don't worry, you're safe. This is Comic-Con.
But it wasn't just this. There was a few other very important cultural phenomena that took place in the 2000s that would lead to the 2010s nerd boom, such as the success of the film Iron Man, which led to the insane rise of superhero films that we unfortunately have to put up with today.
I humbly
True. Very true.
present the Jericho.
Iron Man really changed the archetype of the typical nerd. Tony Stark was depicted in this kind of suave, sarcastic, hyper-intellectual person who was a bit snarky. This archetype would become massive.
But more importantly, he was a billionaire, philanthropist, entrepreneur, playboy. Yeah.
In the world of nerdy films. You could see it in the reboot of Doctor Who, along with Sherlock Holmes.
Molly, coffee, thank you. What happened to the lipstick?
It wasn't working for me.
Really? I thought it was a big improvement. Mouth's too small now.
I don't know. I was never a fan of Sherlock Holmes? I was never a fan of Sherlock Holmes.
And of course, Sheldon Cooper in the infamous Big Bang Theory.
Any questions?
Ugh, bro, when this show first came out, I saw the first episode, and I got a couple of the references, but I was like, okay, this is targeted at kind of me. But I figured out that it was like a meme, and I was just so taken aback. It's like, nerds are trying to take a step out of this. This is bringing us back in time, not move forward.
Of course not.
Big Bang Theory was a true portal
Man, the laugh
into
tracks.
nerd.
Ugh.
Overnight, every single popular girl in school had fundamentally transformed their entire personality into being a nerdy girl. They would put on their big glasses that had no lens in them as they typed away furiously on Tumblr, sharing memes and declaring their love for various fandoms. But at the same time, we were still seeing your typical nerd in films like Superbad with McLovin, but that was starting to become less and less. More so, films and TV would often show nerds as this cool, quippy, smart ass, which for every single nerd of the 90s and 2000s who grew up being bullied, this new archetype to them was very popular because it kind of represented a retribution.
Big man in a suit of armor.
Yeah.
Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Oh, I said the words right, but I said them out of order. Ah.
By now it's the 2010s, and the video game industry is growing and growing. And now there was a new game that was becoming the doormat for people to come into the world of nerddom.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm going to take a guess. It was either Halo or Call of Duty. One of those genres. But, bro, I remember back in the day, like, the Xbox 360 and what was it, the PS2 or 3? Probably the 3. Those games, or those consoles were big, just, like, steps up. Like, big steps up into, like, bringing more people, bringing gaming to the masses. All right? It was becoming more and more socially acceptable to be a gamer. Whereas back before, what you had the original, like, big chunky black Xbox, and then you had like maybe a PS1 or a PS2, and I don't remember if the like commercials for those consoles and in those games were that big, but I remember when the 360 and the PS3 popped off, bro, there were commercials on and the or not the N64, the GameCube. Those three consoles was the holy trinity of gaming. If you had some friends with like at least one of each, you could go to everybody's house and be like, oh, I'm gonna go play Super Smash, I'm gonna go play Halo, I'm gonna go play Call of Duty or whatever. And it was just a blast for me.
Being Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Group 11 right here by the door, please. Group 11.
Oh God. The midnight releases from EB Games. Oh, I remember this so well, dude. Like, oh my God. I remember the lines for some of these games, and the lines for some of these games were so hilariously long. Like, the EB Games near me, it was like on like a mini plaza where it would be like some insurance place, some Amco thing, like the Cash Now place or whatever. And then there'd be a GameStop right, or not a GameStop, an EB Games right there. The line would go out the door, like out to the side, back, around, and then start to like snake on itself. I think when Modern Warfare 2 came out. The same thing with Halo 2 and 3. I went to all those midnight releases, and like the same thing with the World of Warcraft expansions. You know, the midnight releases for these games were huge.
Gaming throughout the 2000s was still mainly seen as kind of nerdy, but Call of Duty brought the cool kids.
I mean, it was nerdy, but there were so many more nerds doing it, dude.
Now, even Chad the Jock was doing 360 no-scopes.
Yeah.
The release of every new COD became this cultural phenomenon. It was as important as big sporting events to young kids.
Yeah.
It just snowballed from here. The success of nerd culture grew and grew. As YouTube grew in popularity and streaming a bit later in the 2010s, gamers were not only becoming popular online.
Bro, look at all the women. Holy shit. Look at all the girls in here, dude. I can't imagine being Pewdie. Like, goddamn, dude. There's like one dude here. I bet this is his first time going out to see like an influencer, and then immediately he is hit in the face by a wall of women thirsting over this one dude. Like, wait, is that a dude? I think this is a dude right here, and maybe there's a dude right here. I don't really see any more. Yeah.
But they were becoming very wealthy. The dorky, nerdy, loser gamer stereotype really was being challenged in the late 2010s. As we see the rise in these content creators like Tfue, Ninja, FaZe Clan that were all not only extremely wealthy, but tended to be quite charismatic and confident, and they seemed to have success with the ladies. And so, by the late 2010s, the nerd...
That was the main divider between the gamer and like the alpha gamer. You know, was this FaZe Clan type of popularity where not only were you good at games that you also had the charisma to get girls, and you drank alcohol too.
Nerds had finally got their revenge. Women were even allowed into nerddom around the 2010s.
Yeah.
Cool, as in it's fun to do.
Everyone is mine to torment.
And so, along with Call of Duty, we were seeing more and more nerdy franchises becoming mainstream. Game of Thrones, Avengers, Fortnite, Minecraft, these things were breaking financial records and were becoming wide-reaching industries through things like merchandising. But there was a problem. With all this success and popularity that nerd culture had achieved, nerds were kind of experiencing an identity crisis. If nerds were no longer being bullied, ostracized, and rejected by society, but in fact championed and celebrated and were now cool, then what really was a nerd anymore?
I'll tell you what a nerd was, dude. The moment, or not the moment, but like the year that all those people started popping off, everybody that wasn't that type of person, like everybody that like underneath but idolized that type of person, immediately everybody saw that you could get success from being good at games. Everybody wanted to be an influencer, a video, like be good at games as a profession, so on and so forth. Immediately everything else suddenly got more popular and competitive. All right, there's people making names with TTV in their name, YT in their name, so on and so forth. It's what happened.
I've never been so overwhelmed by so many fans ever in my life. There's so many of you guys here. It's so awesome.
It's really interesting to think on why. Why so suddenly did society completely change its opinion on nerds? Well, my theory is that the social marketplace changed. As I explained earlier about the 60s and the 80s.
Social marketplace change. Very interesting. Let me hear.
Charisma, confidence, charm, sociability, these were all the key characteristics to get you ahead and successful in mainstream culture.
Yeah. And all of those characteristics are not exclusive to that one type of person, like the jock or the business guy, or so on and so forth. When you see all those characteristics being portrayed by people that play video games for hours on hours upon end, and all of a sudden that they can make money for it and they're entertaining, then holy shit, you just slap those characteristics on that type of person and then boom, up stonks.
Sitting in your mum's basement, necking Mountain Dew and playing Dungeons and Dragons was not. But as technology advanced, computer literacy became a very important and valuable skill set. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg all became owners of mega corporations. Silicon Valley dominated the market, tech startups were popping up left, right, and center. All of these things becoming more profitable than anyone had ever imagined. And so the old archetype of the charming, smooth, suave socialite wasn't made redundant, but it was definitely not as important as it was. And so society's opinion on nerds changed.
Bro, look at this. What is this? Like, what is that? Is that like a necklace? Bro, if she looked down, she about to kill herself. Like, just stab her chest out. Like, bro, this is like some like piece of loot that I'm about to. This is like a necklace I'm gonna loot in Diablo or something. Like, what the hell?
This is LARPing.
Get back from the green menace!
Oh, please don't put the Thunderbolt one in there.
Nowadays, nerd culture still exists, but the term, it doesn't really work so well now. The homogenization of interests has really made it hard for people to clearly fall into categories of interests that could only solely be defined as nerdy. I mean, you can see this with the new wave of gym bros, which I made a whole video on, who very often come from pretty geeky and nerdy backgrounds. They might enjoy video gaming, they get really into the science of bodybuilding, but yet, physically, they look more so like the traditional jock.
Hey, Kali was a bodybuilder first and then went into gaming.
The mainstreaming of counterculture is a part of any subculture's evolution. I mean, you just have to
shit, I'm kind of like that. Like, I got some muscle, like, oh, that way, whatever.
Look at hip-hop, punk, hipsters. Typically, the characteristics that bring people success will be accepted by the mainstream. But I'll end on one final thing, and that is that the nerds made it. So next time you're out and about and you see a nerd, make sure that you look him in the eye, shove him in a locker, and take his lunch money. Big up your nerds.
If you can. If you can. Oh, man. What the fuck? Bro, that was such a good video. Yeah, I mean, being a nerd isn't really as frowned upon. It's actually, like, looked up to now. Like as long as you could be good at a thing and just record yourself being good at the thing, nobody really can put like the nerd stamp on you, because nerd has I don't know, I would say it has like a negative connotation that goes along with it. But if a nerd just simply means being good at a thing, I mean, there's being like, what is a food nerd called? It's being called a chef. What is a nerd that can like catch a football? It's like they're a professional football player. If you're good at, I don't know, being like good at creating houses, you're called an architect or whatever, or buildings, or creating cars, so on and so forth. There's music nerds, all right? There's art nerds. They just like do art and shit, all right? You can slap the nerd title onto anybody that does a thing really good. So what's the moral of the story? To try to get good at something and try to monetize it. But no, I thought that was a good video, man. Definitely. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to see more like these. These are awesome. But I'll catch you guys on the next one, all right? Later.